By the spring of 1945, the once imposing capital of the Third Reich had been reduced to a hollow shell. Berlin was no longer a metropolis of marble and stone, but a dystopian landscape of twisted steel and ash, shattered by years of relentless Allied bombing campaigns that had leveled the entire districts block by block. Far back in time from this disaster, the Nazi leadership refused to accept the mathematical certainty of their eventual defeat. In the relative safety of the eagle's nest, they moved phantom divisions across maps and clung on to a singular desperate hope that superior technology could reverse the tide of the war. Across the shrinking territories of Germany, a hidden army of scientists and engineers worked feverishly against the clock. In underground labs and camouflaged factories, they pushed the boundaries of physics to finalize the wunderwaffe, or the wonder weapons, that propaganda promised would save the regime at the 11th hour. The first of these terror weapons to unleash its fury was the Fieseler Fi-103, known to the world as the V-1 flying bomb. Launched from the hidden ski sites along the French and Dutch coasts, it was the direct ancestor of the modern cruise missile, designed to bypass Allied armies and strike directly at civilian morale. Powered by a simple, sputtering Argus pulse jet engine, the V-1 was an automated drone that required no pilot. It relied on a simple compass and a primitive odometer to track its distance before cutting the engine and diving onto its target. To the exhausted citizens of London, the weapon was known as the doodlebug or buzz bomb. Its distinctive guttural rattling sound became a source of psychological torture, serving as a terrifying countdown. As long as you could hear the engine, you were safe, but when the buzzing stopped, it meant that the bomb was falling. However, the V-1 had a fatal flaw. It flew straight and level at a speed that the fastest Allied fighters could indeed match. Brave Royal Air Force pilots developed a daring countermeasure, flying alongside the bomb and using the wingtips of their Spitfires to physically tip the V-1's wing, confusing its gyroscope and sending it crashing harmlessly into the countryside. Despite these heroic interceptions, thousands of V-1s penetrated the defensive cordon, detonating with a blast force that shattered city blocks and killed thousands. Ultimately, the V-1 was a weapon of economic attrition. It was cheap to build, constructed from mild steel rather than scarce aluminum, and mass-produced in grim assembly halls to conserve Germany's dwindling supply of strategic materials. But the regime possessed a far more advanced and unstoppable delivery system, tested on the remote shores of the Baltic coast at Peenemünde. This was the A4, known to history as the V-2 rocket. Unlike the crude V-1, this was a true ballistic missile, a technological marvel standing at 46 feet tall that burned a volatile mixture of alcohol and liquid oxygen to pierce the atmosphere and touch the edge of space. There was no defense against the V-2. It plummeted from the heavens at over 3,500 miles per hour, 3 times the speed of sound, For the victims in London and Antwerp, there was no warning siren, no engine noise, just a sudden supersonic impact that obliterated everything before the sound of its arrival could even catch up. The technological achievement of the V2, however, was built on a foundation of absolute horror. To avoid Allied bombers, production was moved deep underground to the Mittelberg facility in the Harz Mountains, a hellish factory carved into the rock. Here, in the damp, suffocating tunnels of the Mittelbau Dora concentration camp, thousands of prisoners were worked to death in horrific conditions to assemble these rockets. The death toll among the slave laborers eventually exceeded the number of people killed by the weapons themselves. The program was directed by Werner von Braun, a brilliant aristocrat and engineer who navigated the moral abyss of the regime to pursue his dreams of spaceflight. As the Reich collapsed, special Allied intelligence teams raced to capture this technology, seizing the hardware that would one day become the backbone of the Cold War arms race. American scientists were stunned by the captured components, realizing that the German gyroscopic guidance systems and turbopumps were at least a decade ahead of Allied capabilities. While rockets targeted the cities, the Luftwaffe scrambled to reclaim the skies with jet propulsion, introducing the Messerschmitt Me-262. As the world's first operational jet fighter, the Schwalbe, or Swallow, was a revelation in aerodynamics. With a top speed of 540 miles an hour, it rendered Allied piston engine fighters obsolete, capable of slashing through B-17 bomber formations with devastating speed. But the Me-262 was a victim of poor logistics and Hitler's personal interference. He had famously delayed the program by demanding that the jet be used as a bomber rather than a fighter, a tactical error that blunted the weapon's potential impact during the critical window of the war. By the time it was deployed as a fighter, it was too late. The jets were often grounded by a lack of fuel, sitting as sitting ducks for Allied pilots who learned to attack them during their vulnerable takeoff and landing runs. Even more radical was the Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet, a tiny, tailless interceptor powered by a volatile rocket engine. It was designed as a point defense weapon, taking off on a disposable dolly and climbing vertically like a missile to intercept high-altitude bombers in mere minutes. But the Comet was as dangerous to its pilots as it was to the enemy. Lacking landing gear to save weight, it had to glide back to Earth unpowered and land on a treacherous skid, frequently leading to back-breaking accidents on the runway. The fuel mixture, known as T-Stoff and C-Stoff, was highly corrosive and explosive. A simple leak in the cockpit could dissolve human flesh on contact, turning the pilot's suit into a death trap. German designers also pushed the boundaries of aerodynamics with the Horten HO-229, a futuristic flying wing design that looked like something from another century. Its smooth, tailless shape was intended to reduce drag and increase range, but it inadvertently created a low radar cross-section, an accidental birth of stealth technology. Though it never saw mass production, the prototype was captured and shipped to the US for intense study. Decades later, the eerie similarity between the HO-229 and the modern B-2 Spirit bomber remains a striking testament to the advanced thinking of its creators. Perhaps the greatest fear of the Allied command was the Nazi nuclear program, the race to build an atomic bomb. The German effort relied heavily on heavy water as a moderator for their reactors, a supply chain that was heroically severed by Norwegian commandos who sabotaged the Norsk hydro plant at Vemork. When Allied forces finally raided the offices of the German nuclear research team, the Uranverein, they discovered that while the physics were understood, the program was still in its infancy compared to the Manhattan Project. The German bomb remained a terrifying blueprint, a theoretical nightmare that fortunately never materialized into a functional weapon. On the ground, the obsession with bigger is better culminated in the Panzer VIII Maus, the heaviest tank ever built. Weighing nearly 190 tons, it was a steel fortress impervious to enemy fire, but its immense weight made it a logistical nightmare. It crushed roads and could not cross standard bridges without collapsing them. To solve this, engineers designed a snorkel system allowing the tank to submerge and drive along riverbeds, a complex solution for a vehicle that was ultimately too slow to fight. Ambitions even extended across the Atlantic, with the America Bomber project soliciting designs for aircraft capable of striking New York City. Concepts ranged from long-range aircraft to the sun gun, a bizarre orbital mirror designed to burn cities from space, a science fiction dream that highlighted the leadership's detachment from reality. Only the massive Junkers Ju-390 ever took flight as a prototype, a six-engine giant that teased the possibility of transoceanic warfare before the program was scrapped. In the darkness of the final battles, the Wehrmacht achieved a practical breakthrough with the Vampire infrared night vision system. Mounted on Panther tanks and even individual STG-44 assault rifles, this battery-powered equipment gave German troops the uncanny ability to spot and engage targets in total darkness, a capability that would not become standard for decades. Yet, for all the genius on the drawing boards, these inventions were symptoms of a disorganized empire. Allied reviews of captured files revealed a chaotic bureaucracy that prioritized fantasy over fiction, where funding was split between hundreds of competing designs. The storage yards of the Reich were filled with the rusted husks of failed prototypes, guided missiles that never flew, and tanks that never moved, all useless without the fuel or logistics to support them. The true cost of the wunderwaffe was paid by the millions of slave laborers, whose lives were spent building machines for a dying regime. While the factories churned out experimental wonders, the frontline soldiers lacked basic trucks, fuel, and ammunition. In the end, Hitler sat alone, hallucinating a victory that his wonder weapons could not deliver. The industrial might of Germany had been squandered on miracles rather than the practical weapons of war, compromising the production of standard panzer tanks to chase dreams. As the end arrived, the blueprints for these terrors were burned or torn by retreating SS troops in a futile attempt to erase the secrets of the Reich. But the technology survived the regime. The V-2 rocket, born of war and slavery, evolved directly into the vehicles that would one day launch the space age. Today, the surviving examples of these deadly inventions sit in museums, silent reminders of a dark era of innovation. The story of the Wunderwaffe is a grim tapestry woven from engineering brilliance, strategic incompetence, and moral depravity. It stands as a historical warning that technology, when divorced from humanity, serves only to accelerate the fading of civilization into the dark.